17 Invasion. H5D, 228 Shantytown City Hall Year 3, Day 67, 1712. The Navy of the Hal'Iry was actually called the Space Fleet, and Z-17H had told them that 228 was in the area that was patrolled by the 8th Fleet. Led by a supreme commander, the Hal'Iry counterpart of an admiral, these consisted of scout ships, troop transports, freighters, and warships. The ships that were approaching the planet were a troop transport and a freighter. They were probably trying to follow the pirates to their base, Tizalo said, getting him a look from Z. That's what I'd do, find the base and invade it, with the freighter to hold any captives and contraband. He paused. On the bright side, that means they probably don't have the kind of weapons needed to bombard the planet from orbit, since that was probably never part of the plan. I see you've been paying attention during Major Cadman's tactical lessons, Vale said. Yes, sir, Tizalo said. And based on their size, those two ships will not land in the garage. They're too big. Even if they tried, the Frankenstein is still parked there, so they can't. How do you know about Frankenstein? Colonel Haley brought a copy of the novel with her. I read it with a translator. Between digital and physical copies, we actually have a nice pile of Earth literature on Spira. He looked at the screen. So, what's the plan, boss? We've got several minutes before those ships land. Time to get moving. Vale led the way out of the city hall. They needed to set up as many nasty surprises as they could before the enemy rushed their position, or this fight would be over very fast. Troop Transport 8/1 Cockpit Year 3, Day 67, 1720. Supreme Commander La 27A was behind the controls of Troop Transport 8/1. Unlike that lazy bag of fat, Ha-55Z, he did not spend his time sitting in an office far from the front line. There was a loud thud as the craft landed in the quarry that had once been the heart of the Hal'Iry presence on this planet. Next to this ship, Freighter 8/4 landed. The troop transport had 100 soldiers, with another 20 aboard the other ship. The crews of the two vessels would stay behind. Tilda time to get work. Tilda led the troops out of the craft. The quarry was silent, with a thin layer of water covered the bottom. Tilda something is off. Tilda there were no signs of habitation, nor any visible defenses, both of which were odd for what was supposed to be a busy pirate lair. He made his way to the nearest door and signaled to his soldiers. They opened it and rushed in to find nothing. Let's go, Les said. They headed deeper into the facility. H5D 228 Room Year 3, Day 67, 1722. Vale readied his weapon. He knew that they were greatly outnumbered, even with Z's defenders backing them up. They had taken off their spacesuits so that they could move faster. It was how they had been able to set up several lines of Claymore mines. He and Gial were one side of the main tunnel, while Porter and Tizalo were covering the other. There were also 12 Hal'Iry defenders, with 6 on each side. The soldiers kept going until, Tilda here we go. Tilda they triggered the claymores, taking out 4 of the invaders. Open fire. The team began firing short bursts, taking down more of the soldiers. At the same time, the defenders launched a wave of arrows. The soldiers returned fire with their energy weapons, which Vale had expected. He gave a hand signal and they slowly began retreating while continuing to fire. But it was only a matter of time before the enemy pushed back. H5D 228 Tunnel Year 3, Day 67, 1724. Tilda these are not pirates, Tilda La thought as he ordered his troops to retreat. They had just lost more than 15 soldiers to a surprise attack. Tilda a well-executed surprise attack. Tilda these people were professional soldiers. Also, they were armed with projectile weapons, not energy ones. And then he remembered a report that Supreme Commander Lazy Fat Sack had submitted. Tilda the aliens, they really are using the alien rings as a means of transportation. Tilda. But that report said nothing about them being in league with pirates. Lad 27 said. Tilda, not even lazy fat sack would miss something that important. Tilda, no transmissions, no meetings, no evidence at all. And then it clicked in his head. The aliens had been here, exploring this planet. Tilda, which somehow got the attention of the pirates. Tilda, they had dealt with the pirates. But before they could leave, La and his troops had arrived. None of which changed the fact that the Supreme Commander would have to deal with them now. He turned to his troops and began giving orders. H5D 228 Tunnel Year 3, Day 67, 1726. The counterattack was a coordinated hard push. First, the enemy had thrown several grenades down the tunnel, and then they had put down a carpet of heavy fire while slowly moving forward. NR1 and the defenders had barely been able to find themselves some cover. Tilda and that cover will soon be vaporized, literally. Tilda so Vale needed to do some quick thinking. Fortunately, he had spotted several vents near the floor. One of the problems with mining was that you occasionally hit a pocket of gas, and that the process itself often created gas as well, gas that tended to be toxic. So the designers had added vents to suck out anything that was unbreathable. Another part of the system was a series of emergency doors that were meant to keep the gas out. And NR1 and their allies were on the right side of the first door in that system. The reason their side was the right side was because the door only had controls on one side. Tilda ours. Tilda, while the others provide cover fire, Vale bolted to the controls and slapped a big red button. The door came down with a thud. But Vale knew that it was only a matter of time before they blasted through. Underneath, the big red button was a keyhole, and Z had provided them with the key. So Vale put the key in and turned it. A panel slid aside, revealing another button. Tilda, this is not going to be pretty. Tilda Vale pushed the new button. H5D 228 Tunnel Year 3, Day 67, 1730. Lad 27 was surprised to see the security door come down. But he didn't have time to think about it, because if they knew about the doors, Tilda, then they probably know about the level 2 defenses. Tilda, so he yelled for his troops to put on their gas masks. But it was already too late. While managed to put on his mask in time, a large chunk of his troopers were not so lucky. By the time the tunnel finished filling up with poison gas, they were down to 67 troops and one Supreme Commander. He gave his troops hand signals, and soon they finished blasting through the security door. They carefully made their way through. There was no sign of the enemy, but they had, however, set up several crude explosives. These were connected by a thin and nearly invisible wire. Tilda primitive, but effective. Tilda and designed to be directional from the looks of it. One of the troopers carefully stepped over the wire, right onto a pressure plate. H5D 228 Tunnel Year 3, Day 67, 1731. The explosion took out 7 Hal'Iry troopers. They had stepped over the wire connecting the 2 claymores, which was exactly what Vale had expected them to do. While the troopers were disoriented, the defenders fired. Porter was positioned to lower the second door, which was what she did as soon as the attackers opened fire. As the door made its way down, several grenades were tossed down the corridor by the defenders. As for the level 2 defenses, they had used all the gas. But that was not the only surprise that the designers had included. Porter used the key to unlock the next feature. There was a fizzle as the circuit connected to the door got to work. The troopers attempted to blast through the door, but it did not end well for them. Their blasts were reflected back to them, taking out several of the troopers. But then things went really downhill for them. Because while most of grenades had detonated close to the door, one had kept going. It reached the first section, where it ignited the poison gas. As a precaution against people using their weapons to stop the gas had been made flammable. Porter heard the blast and was glad she couldn't see what was happening on the other side of the door. H5D 228 Tunnel Year 3, Day 67, 1734. Lad 27 signaled retreat to his troopers. The gas explosion had been horrible, killing troopers and setting them on fire. While he could technically press the attack, to do so would condemn the wounded. So he was ordering them out of here. This is not over. They would return with larger numbers and heavier weapons. He had no idea who the enemy commander was, but he had clearly underestimated this person. It was a mistake which he would not make again. He gave the door one last look, then picked up one of the wounded and left. So he did not hear the fizzle as the force field protecting the door disengaged. Then the door opened and the defenders stepped into the section of corridor. As he saw the aftermath, Vale scratched his face. This is not good. Not good at all. Of course, the locals were good in the short term, but... We just got very, very lucky, he said. And these guys are not going to underestimate us again, not to mention the fact that they are going to attack this place again. Yes, the secret is out, Porter said. We're going to have to relocate the children. Which was going to be easier done than said. But if they left Z and her charges here, it was only a matter of time before the fleet send another force. They would either be overwhelmed and massacred, or they would all be arrested and become wards of the state, and neither was an acceptable option. So they had work to do. 18. How to survive blowing up the world. Remains of H4A 701 Stargate Year 3, Day 67, 1815. Nicholas Rush was sitting on the ramp to the Stargate and watching Chaser. It is a pretty ship. One moment, they had been running for the door. And the next, a teleporter had snatched them up and dropped them next to the Stargate. The gate had been activate, and Colonel Young had been reaching for his radio when an explosion had knocked them all off their feet. As he gotten back up, the gate and the area surrounding it had been covered in field of yellow energy. And outside that field, the whole planet had exploded. The team had watched as 701 had shattered like glass around them. When the fire had died down, they had been inside a bubble. It contained them, the Stargate, and a circular section of the field the gate had been in. Varro had tried sticking his hand outside the bubble, but there had been a force field, which was probably a good thing. Above them had been a Hal'Iry installation that definitely had not been there on the planet. It had launched 2 rockets, one at each sun. The stars had then gone supernova, and once again, the team had been swallowed by fire. But they hadn't felt a thing. And eventually, they had been in the black of space again. It was only then that they had been able to think about how they were still breathing, and where that teleporter had come from. The latter had clearly not been part of Bioweapons Lab, nor the town surrounding it. Then, Varro had noticed a small grate next to the ramp up to the Stargate. It was the source of the air they were breathing. This had led Rush to speculate that there was life support equipment buried underneath the gate. It was possible that the teleporter was also down there, but they had no way of ever knowing who had installed this gear or why. Not that the team was complaining, since it had saved their lives. H4A 701, the town of Hamuva, 15 March 1953. Zo 77V sighed and rolled his eyes. Fleet idiots. Zo 77V was a scientist who had just been assigned to the brand-new biological research lab Gamma 7. Located in the heart of the ancient town of Hamuva, it had the latest medical technology and an extensive medical database. But it was not the thing that was bugging Zo, as his friends called him at the moment. Instead, he was watching as teams of fleet technicians was setting up a perimeter around the town. And that was not the only thing they had set up. Above the alien ring, they had set up a Markroman 7 phase-cloaked missile launcher. With twins warheads. Both were part of the emergency systems, which consisted of the containment systems and the self-destruct. The self-destruct also included a spatial warhead, which was buried underneath the lab. 1 Big Bang, and the whole town vaporizes. He was about to go inside when his colleague G81Z approached him. "How are things going, G?" "Well, we still have no idea what that alien ring does, Zo," G81Z said. but we discovered that there is a cave underneath. It's not very big, but we might be able to do something with it. Anyway, I got to go write my official report. The bosses will not be happy. Good luck. G81Z left, while an idea formed in Zo77 Vitak's head. He had security clearance to order equipment, and he was going to use it. It was time for a little scientific rebellion. Tilda, who knows, maybe one day it'll save somebody's life. Tilda. Chaser Infirmary Year 3, Day 67, 1823. It was good to be back aboard the Chaser. Ellie, Jin, and Amanda Perry had figured out how to trigger the phase cloak of the launcher. They had used the ship's hyperdrive to release a particle pulse that reset the device. This had then given them the risky task of recovering the team before they froze to death, or ran out of air, or suffered some other horrible fate. Fortunately, Chaser's ancient shuttle had been just the thing for the job. Piloted by Lieutenant Scott and Sergeant Greer, it had collected them from what little remained of H4A701. An odd side note was that the Stargate was now functional again. Despite having, for all intents and purposes, having become a space gate. Scott had docked the shuttle, and the door opened to reveal a medical team waiting for them. While Young and company were rushed to the infirmary, Greer and Scott headed for the bridge. Chloe had just handed off their samples from the lab, and now Private V. Lazo was giving her a full checkup. As he ran a medical scanner over her, Chloe did her best not to shiver. She knew that V. Lazo was a good guy, but sometimes the memories of what the Central Authority had done to her came back. "You're none the worse for wear," V. Lazo said. "No bacteria, no contaminations, and no injuries." "Thank you," Chloe said. "So what do you think about our samples?" "Well, they're going to keep us busy for a very long time. Even with help from the Epsilon site and Atlantis through the DSI. Good luck." Despite herself, she smiled at V. Lazo. Then her stomach growled, so she decided to head for the mess hall. Tilda, the IOA will probably want a full report, but the paperwork can wait. Tilda, like V. Lazo said, they were going to busy for a very long time, so there was nothing wrong with having dinner first. Epsilon Site Science Lab Year 3, Day 85, 0800. It had been over 2 weeks since the team had escaped from the biological weapons lab. The Epsilon site, the Delta site, Atlantis, and Stargate Command were all working on the information that had been brought back. Then, yesterday, Frank had asked Colonel Telford to meet him in the lab. As he walked into the lab, Frank was looking down a microscope. He looked up and gave the colonel a nod. "What you've got?" "Okay, we've been working on a cure for TJ's ALS," Frank began. "But, until now, our research was going nowhere fast." "Until now," meaning that you've made breakthrough. "Maybe," Frank said. "The plan was to either upgrade the cure for Dr. Park's eyes or modify the pathogen the Central Authority used on Chloe Armstrong. But that was before we had blood samples from Mr. Wallace and the data from Bioweapons Lab in the mix. And I've figured out what we need to do, but I'm still working on the how. TJ has the same blood group as Mr. Wallace, so we begin with a blood transfer to introduce Naquata to her bloodstream. Then we inject her with one of the Hal'Iry drugs called He-17. That should cause the Naquata to bind to the genes we need to rewrite, which should allow us to reprogram the Nakai pathogen to target only those. It's the reprogramming that it still need to figure out." "Wait, you found a cure for ALS." "I'm afraid it will only work for Lieutenant Johansson. We only have 1 vial of He-17, and several of the ingredients are simply not found in the Milky Way galaxy. And even for TJ, there's only a 70% chance that it will work. That's 70% better than what she has now." He gave Frank a nod and walked out. Tilda better leave him to it. Tilda, in the meantime, he would send an update to Stargate Command and Atlantis so that they could pitch in as well. Atlantis Control Area, Gate Room Year 3, Day 85, 0935. Colonel John Shepard was in the gate room, grumbling under his breath. He was wearing his dress uniform, which he hated, but it had been 10 years since the Wraith-Tory War had ended. So the IOA had decided that there was going to be an official reception, and that Shepard's team, Aka Atlantis Reconnaissance, one had to attend. While Taylor Emigan and Ron on decks were already waiting near the Stargate, Rodney McKay was yet to show up. Shepard turned to Radek Zelenka, who was manning one of the control consoles. "Where is Rodney?" "Still pouting over losing his award," Zelenka said. "The award, or the lifetime supply of chocolate chip cookies?" The look on Zelenka's face said that it was clearly the latter. As for the award, it was called the Golden Dynamite Stick and had been given to him as a reminder of the Project Arcturus incident. Or, as it was commonly called that time, he blew up a solar system. But recently, 18 days ago, Nicholas Rush had gone and blown up a binary solar system. So McKay had lost his award, and he was not the only one to lose an award. Colonel Samantha Carter had been granted the Vorash Award for, well, blowing up the star Vorash orbited and destroying a Goa'uld armada. This award came with a lifetime supply of blue jelly, and since the self-destruct had included a double supernova, Rush had been given this award as well. And since Carter would also be at the reception, Shepard got the feeling that this was going to be a long day. Epsilon Site Science Lab Year 3, Day 97, 0417. Telford entered the science lab. Epsilon 1 had just come back from a mission, so he had been awake and debriefing with the team when Frank had called. He had been very busy for the past few days. After losing Pelops, the Goa'uld had teetered on the edge of civil war. But then, a Goa'uld called Vazak had launched a successful takeover. 3 days ago, he had launched a military campaign against several groups of pirates and criminals. They're trying to build some goodwill before implementing whatever their real plan is. So the base's teams had been going off-world to collect intelligence, while the base staff had been hard at work as well. "Keep it short, Frank," Telford began. "I need sleep." "Yes, you look terrible," Frank said. "Anyway, we finished the cure. I've sent the formula to Spira already, and that's not all." He turned around a laptop. "This is the checklist on Destiny's paranoid mode. There's 102 protocols. Until yesterday, all of them were active. Then one of them switched off. And today, 2 more were switched off by the ship's AI." He paused. "Long story short, we're getting signals that Destiny has begun going back to normal." "Excellent work," Telford said. "The paperwork can wait until I don't feel like I'm carrying an elephant on my back." "Yes, sir." Telford walked out of the science lab. He really needed sleep. The Goa'uld would still be there tomorrow. Chaser Infirmary Year 3, Day 100, 0930. Lisa Park walked into the infirmary and found Private V. Lazo behind a laptop. Next to him stood Matthew Scott. Except, it wasn't Matthew Scott. Dr. Bennett, Spira's chief medical officer, had used the ancient stones to swap with the lieutenant. The two of them had been preparing the potential ALS cure for TJ. They were going over the formula one last time. TJ was on one of the nearby beds, while Colonel Young was pacing nearby. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Young asked. "No," Bennett said. "Frank was right. There is only a 70% chance of it working, but it's the best chance we've got." "Dr. Bennett, you wanted to talk to me." "Excellent timing, Dr. Park," Bennett said. "Dr. Lamb wants to be here for the lieutenant's treatment." Carolyn Lamb was Stargate Command's chief medical officer. "And you wanted to discuss the Hal'Iry with Dr. Jackson, so I thought we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone." "Sounds good to me." The communications device was on a nearby table with a stone next to it. Lisa picked up the stone and put it on the device. Then she was at Stargate Command, so she took a deep breath and went to find Dr. Jackson. At the same time, Dr. Lamb was now aboard the Chaser. Lamb looked around the ship's infirmary. "Nice place," Lamb said. "We do our best," Bennett said. I'm Dr. Bennett, and this, he gestured to Vilazzo, is Private Vilazzo. He's a Nakai and the de facto second-in-command of Chaser's medical department. Nice to meet you, Lamb began. I'm Dr. Carolyn Lamb, so may I? She gestured towards the laptop. Of course. Vilazzo moved over so that Lamb could sit down behind the laptop. Lamb sat down behind the laptop and spent 10 minutes studying the medical data. She was not surprised to find that Bennett, who had worked for her for several years, had done his homework. The British doctor had always been very good in the research department. Tilda, but his hair has been neater. Tilda, the last time she had seen him, his red hair had been short. But now it was 20 centimeters long and he had a wild, unkept beard. Completing her check, she turned to Colonel Young. I checked the treatment, Colonel, she said. And it's this or nothing, sir. Young said nothing, only nodding his reluctant approval. So the three of them got to work on setting up the treatment. Samuel Wallace had already provided them with the blood they would need, so all they needed to do was put the Roman 4 in place. Then they would inject the He-17 into the transfer line. Finally, there would be injection of the modified Nakai pathogen, which they had codenamed Zeus. At the same time, they were using an advanced scanner to keep an eye on her vital signs. Blood transfusion running, Doctor, Vilazzo began. How are you feeling, Lieutenant? I'm feeling fine, Johansson said. So, how long due until you inject the He-17? 10 minutes, he looked at Lamb, who gave him a nod. So, presuming this works, what do you want for your celebration dinner? I don't know, but the dessert will involve chocolate ice cream, Johansson said. Vilazzo chuckled. Before they had reached Freedom Prime, Destiny's crew had lacked any chocolate. It was suspected that this food contained 1,500 ingredients or more, making it impossible to chemically recreate. But Freedom Prime had been home to a plant very similar to the cocoa plant of Earth. And with the crew having been on the planet for months, the crew had been able to create a small stockpile of the foodstuff. Now there was nothing to do except to execute the treatment and hope that it would work. 19 Aftermath. Spira Briefing Room Year 3, Day 1,001,015. The surviving Hal'Iry troopers had boarded the troop transport and left the freighter behind. There had been so many wounded that they had needed the freighter crew to help them with treating them. The fleet had returned a week later, with 200 troopers and 3 fully armed warships. But it had been too late. The quarry had been stripped to the walls, as had the shanty town. And both the freighter and the Frankenstein had been gone. All they had found were rows of graves containing the dead alien workers, and the remains of their own people, stripped off their gear. It had been an insane race against the clock, but the crew of the Spira had found Z and her wards a new home. H7V 775 was another planet with a quarry. The quarry in question was empty and 5 times the size of their old one. It was also far off the beaten path and deep inside a nebula filled with corrosive gases. This had not been a problem when the quarry had been in operation 300 years ago. It had dried up 205 years ago and been abandoned. In the years since, the alloys used for the hull had changed. And while the old one had been corrosion-proof, the new ones acted as if they were made from tissue paper. The freighter, which had been loaded with the larger and heavier pieces of the old settlement, had barely made it to the planet. And it was an extreme certainty that it was never going to fly again. Which was also true for the Frankenstein. As for the Stargate, Coulson and his team had put together an iris. They had also provided them with several Primian gate remotes, while Samuel Wallace had used the computers from the Frankenstein and the freighter to, well, Frankenstein together a dialing computer. Vale had wanted to make sure that the 228 were properly settled in, so he had parked Spira, which was like the Hal'Iry ships of old in the hull department in orbit of the planet. And now, they were heading back out again. Vale was reading the final report on the new settlement and its defenses. Besides the bows and arrows, The 228 now had a pile of captured energy weapons and a planetary defense grid. The grid had been created by combining the weapons from the Frankenstein with the few weapons that had been on the freighter. There had also been several particle weapons that had been left behind. These had been fixed and added to the mix as well. He had just finished reading the report when Jennifer Haley walked in. She was carrying a computer tablet. "We just got an update from Chaser, sir." "How did Lieutenant Johansson's treatment go?" "Not very good," Haley began. "Several minutes ago, she fell into a coma." She gave the tablet to Vale. "The long version is on there, but she's stable and both Bennett and Lamb are keeping an eye on her. I've given Allison a copy, and she's got a team going over the data right now to see if there's anything we can do to help." "Good thinking. Stay on top of it." Vale closed the file on TJ and moved to the next one. "What else do we have?" "I don't have to tell you that we've left orbit and we're moving at maximum FTL. But Tizalo and Levine did the math, and we should be back on schedule in about a week. Also, we ran the checklist on Destiny again. The count is at 90 activate subprotocols and dropping. If the protocols keep turning off at this rate, the math says we should be able to board the ship in about a month." "Wait. Yeah, that's the last file." Vale moved on to finale file. "The IOA changed the plan regarding Destiny once they learned about the Hal'Iry. The original plan had been to move the original Destiny expedition back to ship, plus Varro and several others. The details are all in there, but I'm pretty sure you're not going to like it." Vale sighed. "I suspect you are right, dismissed." "I'll be on the bridge if you need somebody to grumble at, sir," Haley said with a nod, before walking out. Vale set to reading the file. The new plan was for both Chaser and Spira to be left with a skeleton crew of 12. For Chaser, that meant that 148 souls would be moving to Destiny. In Spira's case, she would be adding 108 people to the crew. This meant that Destiny would have a crew of 256 people. Of course, there was the issue of who would be in command. The brass had decided that since he had been out here the longest, that job would fall to Colonel Everett Young. And then there was the issue of him having to select the 12 to stay behind, Tilda including the new CO. Tilda he was glad he would have Haley to grumble at later. But for now, he had decisions to make. 8th Fleet Headquarters, Supreme Commander's Office, Year 3, Day 1,001,015. La 27 was reading the latest reports on the aliens, which the higher-ups had called Kazinro. Comment outside in Zinro was the word for galaxy, so it meant people from outside the galaxy. Tilda typical bureaucrats, basically giving them a name that told you nothing. Tilda he closed the folder and leaned back. They had found signs that the quarry had been inhabited by a colony of younglings after the place had officially been abandoned. As for where they were now, that was a giant mystery. But he had decided that it was not a priority at the moment. The Kazinro were. Tilda, wherever they went, those younglings aren't going anywhere. Tilda, as he closed the report, somebody rang the bell to his office. "Enter," he said. Middle Commander FC-83H came in. FC-83H was the commanding officer of the Decimator, a Class II warship that was leading a pack of ships following the first Kazinro vessel. La 27 nodded towards the chair across from him, and the commander sat down. It was his report that La 27 had been reading. "I've read your report," La 27 began. "So, you believe that the alien rings are connected to the Kazinro?" "Yes, based on the readings. My science officer believes that each of the Kazinro vessel has one of these alien rings on board." "So you want to do research on the rings?" La 27 leaned back and pondered the proposal. "Looks, it's a good proposal, but the politicians are not a big fan of research on the rings. They are never going to approve this, so we're going to have to go around them somehow." "Got any ideas on how to do that?" "Well, you have top secret clearance, so you can get us all the information and research that's already been done on the rings so far." FC-83H said. And we have 4 warships following the first ship, each with 1 science officer aboard. We could put the 4 of them together and officially ship them off for training. I know a couple of people at a civilian school kind enough to fake the paperwork. I'll dig up the data and send it to the decimator. You call your friends and assemble the team, Lad 27 leaned back. Dismissed. Yes, Supreme Commander. FC-83H stood up and saluted the Supreme Commander, then walked out. As soon as he was gone, Lad 27 activated his computer and got to work. He had research to dig up. Chaser Infirmary Year 3, Day 144, 12:17. TJ opened her eyes and looked around her. She didn't recognize the room, but it was rather blurry. As it came into focus, she realized that she was in the infirmary. She had spotted Vilazzo, who had clearly been waiting over her. The private had fallen asleep in his chair. She smiled at the sight. It was at this point that Dr. Nicholas Rush came in. He had been on his way to the bridge, which meant passing the infirmary. Rush woke Vilazzo up, who got to his feet. "Lieutenant, you're awake," Vilazzo said. "How long was it out?" "Well, you've been in a coma for 44 days, Rush said. "What about the therapy?" TJ looked at Rush and Vilazzo. "Did it work?" "We'll have to run some tests to see if it did," he turned to Rush. "While I'm doing that, I suspect that there are some people who want to talk to the lieutenant." Rush nodded and grabbed his radio. The first person he contacted was Colonel Young. Epsilon Site CO's office, 01.0.1.2020, 2000. David Telford was sitting in office, reading the latest update from Chaser. Earlier today, Lieutenant Johansson had woke up, and the analysis the ship's medical staff had run had confirmed that her ALS had been cured. Unfortunately, it had also confirmed that the treatment would be impossible to recreate on Earth. And that was not the only news in the update. 2 hours ago, the folks on Atlantis had run the Destiny checklist. The day before, there had been only 3 active subroutines. Now, however, only the main subprogram remained. The IOA wanted the people on Chaser to prepare for the relocation, but Colonel Young had decided that it could wait. Today, they were celebrating TJ's cure and the start of the new year. It was also the first day that they were using the Earth calendar. The decision to switch over had been made several weeks ago by both the IOA and Primian Senate. They had decided use to the start of 2020, since it was the nearest marker. Tilda, all in all, looks like 2020 is going to be an interesting year. Tilda Telford scrolled down. The next section of the file was from Spira. Colonel Vale and his people were packing up to move to Destiny. Vale had also chosen the skeleton crew that would stay behind. This crew would be led by Major Frank Levine. There was also a note in Vale's section of the update regarding who should be Chief Medical Officer aboard Destiny. Alexander Bennett was a fully trained medical doctor, but he was a civilian. And the bulk of his service had been at Stargate Command, which was very different than serving on a spaceship in the middle of nowhere. So Vale recommended TJ over Bennett. He concluded his piece by saying that if her rank was a problem, they would simply have to promote her. Tilda worked for Shepard. Tilda, and that while they were at it, Private Vilazzo deserved a promotion as well. Tilda, he worked his butt off trying to cure TJ. Tilda Telford just hoped that his superiors and the IOA would have the common sense to listen to Vale's recommendations. Destiny Gate Room 01.0, 2.2020, 0900. Lieutenant Matthew Scott was the first person to step through the event horizon. He looked around the gate room and got a feeling of déjà vu. This was how their adventure had begun 11 years ago. Except this time the boarding was calm and orderly, with nobody being injured and none of the supplies being sent flying. And everybody knew where they were going this time around. Not to mention that the ship was fully operational now. Tilda, and from the looks of it, fully charged. Tilda Greer joined him as he headed for the crew quarters. "I can't believe I'm saying this," Scott began, "but it's good to be home." "Yeah," Greer said. "Don't tell anybody, but I kind of missed this rust bucket." While the two of them continued talking, Captain Tamara Johansson and Corporal V. Lazo were boarding the ship. The two of them had been promoted this morning. Tilda V. Lazo thought as he looked around Destiny's gate room. He had read all the files, heard the stories, and studied the blueprints. But actually being here was something else. V. Lazo shook his head. "I've done my homework, but this is amazing. Come on, I'll show you our new digs. Well, technically my old digs, but you know what I mean. Lead the way, boss." As the two of them walked out, Colonel Young watched them go. Young wanted to make sure that everybody and all the supplies made it aboard. He was directing people when Elian Rush came through, followed by Lieutenant James. When he had been selecting the skeleton crew for Chaser, he had seriously considered James for commanding officer. In the end, he had selected Dr. Andrea Kennair as CO. The small crew also included 5 military personnel, led by Corporal Samuel Lee. Lee would double as second-in-command for Chaser. James joined Young. "Lieutenant, are we still on schedule on the other end?" "Yes, sir. Everybody should be aboard in about 10 minutes. Spira's crew should be arriving aboard Chaser 5 minutes after that. Then it's just a case of rinse and repeat." Young nodded. Chaser was currently parked in orbit of a planet without a Stargate. That way, both Destiny and Spira presumed that she was simply another Mark I Stargate in the network. This would allow them to use Chaser as a relay point between the two. Of course, Spira was pretty far from Chaser, so it would take a lot of power to dial in. Tilda good thing that Spira has fully functional capacitors. Tilda Young nodded and dismissed James so that she could go and settle in. Then he went back to getting his people back on board. 8th Fleet Headquarters Supreme Commander's Office, 01.03.2020, 0800. La 27 was reading FC 83H's report on the Kazinro and the alien rings. Tilda subspace wormhole transportation devices. Tilda, he threw the folder down on his desk while uttering a long stream of curses. It was not the alien rings he was cursing about. It was the fact that Hive leadership, a collection of 100 females who ran the Hal'Iry Empire, had known exactly what the rings did, and that they had attempted to sweep it under the rug for propaganda purposes. Tilda idiots. Tilda and they were not only fools. Underneath the Hive leadership was the collective of officials. These were mayors, governors, and other mid-levels officials. The collective was a mix of male and female Hal'Iry, but all of them, in his opinion, were idiots. The data on the alien rings was right there, with many of them having the proper clearance to access it and figure out the truth. Tilda this could be an open secret, one that could change the Empire for the better. Tilda, but instead they were too busy with their own little power games, so none of them knew. Still feeling cranky, he activated a log recorder on his desk. Supreme Commander La 27A, Fleet Log 4.7b, Supplement 33. He leaned back in his chair. "I've just finished reading the latest report on Operation Shadow." Operation Shadow was the code name he and FC-83H had given their research into the alien rings and the Kazinro. Log 4.7a was the official record, which was what he was sending back to his superiors. 4.7b normally were the rough notes, but La 27 was using them to hide his personal thoughts on this mess. So now what? I'm stuck with a leadership and superiors that don't want to know the truth. Yet they want me to do something about these aliens, and for do something, read wipe all of them out. And why? To keep their propaganda/ideology in place. These people haven't do anything to us. They're no threat, and yet, he sighed and began pacing his office. The most recent reports indicate that the bulk of the Kazinro have relocate the bulk of their forces to the first vessel. This makes this vessel the largest threat. Therefore, I have given orders to concentrate our efforts or this ship and ignore the second and third one. Those ships can be dealt with once the first has been neutralized. Finally, I don't want to keep calling these ships first vessel, second vessel, and third vessel, so I am codenaming them Prime, Follower, and Tail. I've also ordered the ships following them to see if they find out what these ships are actually called. End of entry. He deactivated the log recorder. 20 opening salvo. Destiny Vale's quarters 01.1 7.2020 1702. Vale kicked off his boots and sat down behind his desk. It was their third week aboard Destiny, which so far he was finding a bit of a mixed bag. Compared to Spira, their new home had its perks. It was far less cramped, had a better facilities, and was well armed. But the integration of the two crews also came with issues. Colonel Young tended ask advice from the original expedition members. And the Nova Roma SG teams often got the short end of the stick when it came to off-world missions. It was a source of tension amongst the crew. What also didn't help was that the original crew held all the leadership positions. As for Vale, he had spending most of his time getting up speed with the massive ancient vessel. Tilda, there's only so such the paperwork can tell you. Tilda, especially since the Viceroy had repaired the entire ship as best as they could. With the result being that Destiny was now fully functional. This meant that there were plenty of rooms and systems to figure out, which was keeping the former Spira scientists busy. But sooner or later, this work would run out as well. Tilda, which won't be good for morale either. Tilda, at the moment, Vale was writing all of this in his first report since arriving on the ship. Young probably wouldn't be happy about it, but that wasn't his problem. He had just finished his report and sent it when somebody rang the bell. "Come in." The door opened, and Camille Ray came in. Spira had lacked an IOA representative, which had been fine with Vale. He was not exactly the biggest fan of the International Oversight Authority and its bureaucratic attitudes. They reminded him of the Senate back in the old days. Of course, that was not Ray's fault. "Miss Ray, what brings to my little corner of our really big spaceship?" "Well, it's been 2 weeks, and we haven't even had a single conversation." "So you decide to force this issue," Vale said, while gesturing towards chair across from his. "Look, Colonel," Ray began as she sat down. "I've read your file, and I've talked to several of your old crew, so I know that you're not the biggest fan of the IOA, but I'm only here to help." "Help with what?" "I've noticed that there is tension between the original expedition members and the former Spira crew members." She pointed to Vale's laptop. "I presume that was the report you just send back to Earth." "Nothing gets past you," Vale said as he turned the laptop around so that she could read his report. "So, what do you think we should do about this?" "Well, Colonel Young will not be happy about this. I'll discuss this situation with him and we'll take it from there." "Sounds like a plan to me." Ray nodded, got up, and left. As soon as she was gone, Vale turned his laptop back and closed it. He had more reports to write, but those could wait. For now, he was more in the mood for dinner, so he headed out for the mess hall. When he got there, he found Chloe Armstrong, Illy Wallace, Sinara, and Nikita Aronov sitting at a table. They were eating and talking. While Vale went to collect his dinner, they continued their discussion. "So you've added everything to your documentary?" Sinara asked. "It's a lot of footage," Illy said. "I'm only a third of the way there." "Well, it's been a roller coaster," Aronov said. "What exactly is a roller coaster?" Sinara asked while holding up a hand. "Alien girl, remember? I really need to get up to speed with all this Earth stuff, and what kind of food is this?" "I'll show you a picture someday," Chloe said. "It's mashed sweet potatoes with some kind of beans, a vegetarian cheese burger, and slices of something tomato-like. The Viceroy planted the garden with all sorts of edible and medicinal plants. Dr. Park is leading a team that's working on figuring out what is what. Speaking of projects, Rumor has it that the two of you are turning the research lab into Archaeology HQ, and that you are looking for members for a team. The rumors are true, Aronov began. And since you've been studying Dr. Jackson's work, you're at the top of our list. So, are you interested? Sounds good to me, but do we have any artifacts to work on? There were several artifacts we brought along from Spira and another batch from Chaser. And we're looking for places where we might be able to dig up Hal'Iry artifacts. But that was as far as he got before the alarm began blaring. Destiny Bridge 01.1, 7.2020, 1740. Matthew Scott was in the command chair, while Greer, Volker, and Brody were manning the 3 forward consoles. Greer was the right console, while Brody was in the middle and Volker manned the left console. A minute ago, 3 Hal'Iry ships had entered sensor range. Based on their size and the energy signature of their weapons, they appeared to be warships. So Scott had sounded the alarm. He was calculating how long it would take for the warships to reach weapons range when Colonel Young came in, followed by Ali and Lieutenant Colonel Haley. The last person to come in was Sergeant T. Zalo. "What do we have?" Young asked. 3 Hal'Iry warships on approach, sir, Scott began. Destiny has estimated their weapons and says we'll be in range in. He worked several buttons. 3 minutes, sir. How much firepower do these vessels have? Based on the energy readings, a lot, Brody said. But at this range, I can't get you any details. I could take a stab at it, Haley said. Narrow the sensors and tune them to specific band. We need to get that information, but I'm going to need help. Do it, Young said. Illy. Oh, right. I'm the help, Illy said with a nod. Illy and Haley set to work. One of the displays facing the command chair changed to show a picture of one of the warships, with a series of red dots indicating where the weapons were. There were 8 particle weapons and 2 torpedo launchers. Tilde 4 forward particles weapons and 1 forward torpedo tubes. Tilde the other 4 particles weapons and the second torpedo launcher were pointed aft. Looks like they're turrets, Illy said. Yes, they can turn 90 degrees to the left and right, with the barrel being able to move up to a 45 angle. Then the warships opened fire with their torpedo launchers. Decimator Bridge 01.1, 7.2020, 1744. The bridge of the Decimator was a cramped, square space. There were control stations lining the bulkheads, with the only way in being a hatch in between 2 stations. The command chair was in the center of the room, with the helm station in front of it. The helm was in a sunken pit, so that the commander could see through the only window in the room, which was a round porthole in the bow bulkhead. Said porthole was fitted with several circuits that could provide the commander with all sorts of data. Sitting in the command chair, Middle Commander FC 83H was glad to have his science officer back. The research on the alien rings was complete, so he had been able to disband his makeshift science team. That was the good news. The bad news were his new orders. If it had been up to him and La 27A, they would have simply let the Kazinro leave the galaxy. They would simply fade into legend, and that would be the end of it. But the leadership wanted the aliens wiped out and all 3 vessels destroyed. So here he was. Taking a deep breath, he turned to his communications officer. Lower Commander, anything from the Crimson Claw? The Crimson Claw was the 4th warship in the group that had been following the target. Its sublight drives had failed several minutes ago, and they were still working on the repairs. Something tells me we're going to need all the firepower we can get on this one. Nothing so far, Commander, the officer said. Sir, the helm officer said, the target is turning to engage us. Then the target opened fire with everything she could muster, which it turned out was a lot. She hit the Decimator with her main weapon, throwing FC 83H from his chair. He was getting up to his feet when one of the consoles exploded, and then a support beam came down from the ceiling. Weapons officer, shield status. Down to 60%, sir, the officer said. And that was with just 2. That was as far as the officer got before another shot from the main weapon hit. Tilda bloody idiots, ordering this attack. Tilda FC-83H was about to give an order when another piece of the ceiling came down and the world went black. Destiny Bridge 01.1, 7.2020, 1747. Destiny's shields were down to 60%. She had destroyed one of the Hal'Iry warships and disabled another. The last of the 3 ships had engaged its hyperdrive. There was a 4th vessel further downrange, but that was not their current problem. Young was sitting in the command chair. He turned to Volker, who had been doing the flying during this engagement. "Get us out of here," Young said. "How long to repair the shields?" "An hour and a half, maybe 2, Brody began. The Viceroy installed a program that allows for easy command input for the maintenance drones. They also found 6 additional ancient units and brought a dozen of their own. Of course, the Viceroy versions are crude copies. "I'll take what I can get." He turned the chair to Facily, who was sitting at one of the aft consoles. "Any ideas why they attacked us now?" "No idea." He looked at Haley. "But Colonel Haley has an idea about that." "Based on the scans, the Hal'Iry use traditional hyperdrives, which means they travel in subspace," Haley said. "And that means they can only attack us while we're moving at sublight speeds, which is why they attacked us now." "That's something, but they'll be back." "And probably with more firepower," Tizalo said, who's standing next to Illy at the side station. "You've read the report on the skirmish at the quarry. This is already an escalation, sir." "Yeah, we're going to have to come up with a plan." Young leaned back in the command chair. He thought that Tizalo's comment was right on the money, which meant that they wouldn't just need a plan. They would need really good plan, or this would end badly.